Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Deja vu.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone, discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 11, titled And When the Sky Was Opened. And When the Sky Was Opened it came out on December 11th, 1959. It was directed by Douglas Hayes, written by Rod Serling. Teleplay was by Rod Serling. Richard Matheson wrote a short story that this was based on, and it stars Rod Taylor, Jim Hutton, and Charles Aidman.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
suddenly up ahead.
You're moving into what lands another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, here is Rod Serling's opening voiceover from And When the Sky Was Opened. Her name, X-20. Her type, an experimental interceptor. Recent history, a crash landing in the Mojave Desert after a 31-hour flight 900 miles into space. Incidental data. The ship, with the men who flew her, disappeared from the radar screen for 24 hours. Then there's a brief little dialogue, interlude, and then we come back with, but the shrouds that cover mysteries are not always made out of a tarpaulin, as this man will soon find out on the other side of a hospital door.
And from IMDb, we have our description of this episode. 3 astronauts return to Earth after seemingly having made an encounter that dooms them and their craft to erasure from existence itself. It's pretty solid.
That's a horrible summary because it gives away all of the surprises right in like line 1. It's a spoiler, I guess, and a summary. So to just briefly expand on what happens, we start with seeing one character who is, I want to make sure I get the names right because I kept mixing up these characters, who is Colonel Clegg Forbes. And he was one of the people on this experimental aircraft, goes to visit Major William Gart, who's still in the hospital because he landed with a broken leg, who was also one of the pilots, and is interrogating him about the third person that was on their ship, who Gart doesn't remember. Most of the episode then is a flashback of Forbes telling Gart about what sort of happened since they landed when there were 3 of them. This third person that he remembers was Ed Harrington. They land, Harrington and Forbes get discharged right away. Gart has to stay in the hospital because he has the broken leg. And Harrington starts behaving weird, and then he disappears, like just in the middle of a scene is suddenly gone, and Forbes can't find him, and there seems to be no record of his existence. No one remembers he's there. And so Forbes kind of keeps freaking out. And then we come back to him telling the rest of this story to Gart. And Forbes suggests that something Harrington said has stuck with him, that, they weren't actually supposed to make it back. Something wasn't supposed to let them through, and now it's sort of rectifying things. Forbes runs out of the hospital room at the end of their conversation, and Gart goes into the hallway to look for him, and there's nobody there, and now nobody has any recollection of Forbes, and so Gart realizes they are all sort of slowly disappearing. And then there's a coda at the end where Gart has gone back in the room. A nurse leaves to go get a doctor or something, and then a nurse and a doctor come back in the room and say, "Oh yes, this room is empty and ready to take 3 patients," because now Gart is gone as well.
Yeah.
So the reason I didn't like the summary was whether there actually were 3 people on the ship or not is sort of the central question for most of the episodes. So starting with, the 3 people, I was like, well, as soon as you read that, you don't need to watch it anymore.
Yeah, and before we actually get into it, I'd want Forbes, who is kind of, I would say, if there was a main character, it was Forbes, was
definitely
played by Rod Taylor, who is an Australian actor, apparently, and he played Winston Churchill in Inglourious Bastards.
And I recognize Taylor from The Birds, the Alfred Hitchcock film, which would have been around the same time.
Good call. I didn't go that far back because I was so surprised by him being in Inglourious Bastards. I'm like, oh my gosh, cool.
He looked a little bit, I thought, in this, which I hadn't noticed in The Birds, he looks a little bit like Kirk Douglas. And I'm not sure what about it was.
It's the butt chin. He has a butt chin.
Yeah, but why didn't I notice that in the bird? Maybe I did the first time I saw the birds, and now I've just forgotten that. I don't know.
Or maybe you didn't know who Kirk Douglas was when you saw the birds.
I hope I knew who Kirk Douglas was when I saw the birds. Anyway, he reminded me of him more this time, and I was trying to think if it was maybe something with the way his hair was or something. I don't know. Anyway.
So right off the bat,
long career though, all the way from Twilight
did.
Zone, Alfred Hitchcock films, and then in Inglourious Bastards. And then he passed away fairly recently.
yeah, I think I saw about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
If I recall, or to go right into the discussion of this episode, one of the things you mentioned about our little spoilerific IMDb summary, I thought this was one of the episodes. First of all, just an overall statement. I found this episode horrifying. This was the most horrifying episode that I've seen so far. This one hit me the most and was the most horrifying. But
We've had, I think, like the last 2 or 3 episodes, you've had very negative reactions to whether you liked the episode or not. But there was the one that you just thought was like super creepy, and then another one that was really just dark. And so,
and I'll say right off the bat
here.
too, I loved this episode probably because I found it so horrifying. But I did think that they held, one of our kind of, if we're critiquing or having thematic critiques of the Twilight Zone so far, I think one of the things that we've noticed is like, we kind of get what's going on in the first 2 minutes. And this was one of those, like, I still don't quite know, and we'll get to that during the episode discussion. I still don't quite know what actually happened in that episode, and I love it for it. Like, I love it for it.
Yeah, this was one where they felt a little less concerned with kind of tying up every loose end and all the details, and more about the sort of tone and a really existential dread. I gotta say, there's a if anyone has a chance to see it, there's a really great short film called Space Flower that I saw at a film festival a couple years ago, and actually talked to the filmmakers and got a copy of it to show in class, because it's a really good example of good, solid short filmmaking. And there's a song in it called Existential Dread that just keeps coming on the radio, and literally the lyrics are like existential dread, and it's fantastic and totally fits the film. But that just reminded me of it. Anyway, it's really about creating that tone rather than wrapping up the exact plot holes.
And going along with kind of the theme of the last couple episodes that we've seen, this was a walk back from the bigger cast, bigger sets, more expensive looking episodes that we've seen to a pretty simple. I mean, they really kind of took it back to basics, I feel like, with this episode. There weren't a whole lot of sets. There was like a bar, there was the hospital, not a huge cast, no special effects. Like they kind of rolled back to some just straight up horror, I thought, in this was a very chilling episode for me.
Yeah, although I will say it's I agree with you on sort of the rollback from some of the really expansive episodes we've seen in the last few, particularly Judgment Night.
Mm-hmm.
But I really appreciate just even in the more confined quarters and stuff, I thought the level of execution remained very high. Like, it wasn't going back to the first couple episodes where we thought they were kind of still figuring out their way and some things weren't done as well. It didn't feel like confined or that they didn't have the budget or anything. It just felt like this was appropriate for the story. And they still did everything very well, and even had some, fancy camera moves and stuff like that to give it a little more production value. But I actually thought a little ways in, so it starts at the hospital with Forbes running into some nurses, and then he goes into the room and to talk to his fellow pilot, whatever guy's name,
Astronaut.
Fellow astronaut. There you go. Yeah.
Gart. It was
Gart
Gart,
was such a
Clegg,
weird name. I just keep forgetting
Ed
him.
Harrison or something.
So it was Bill Gart, Clegg Forbes, and Ed Harrington. And for some reason, Gart, I just keep blanking out. Anyway, goes in to talk to Gart. And there's a period, they have quite a long conversation there where I really thought the whole episode was going to take place in that hospital room between the two of them, which would have been interesting. It would not have been as good as it ended up being, given where the story went. But that's an interesting challenge as a film, and this reminded me a lot of Perchance to Dream, in that we start with this sort of setup of somebody going into an office, and then really the entire episode plays out during the conversation between the two of them, even as we get flashbacks and see what happened as someone's describing it. But really, the beginning and end of the episode, we're still in that room with them.
Very true. Just before we even really get into more specifics, I just want to explain why I found this episode so horrifying. I am an atheist, and so like and I've mentioned this on this podcast before, the idea of just the nothingness of the afterlife, of not existing anymore and not even knowing that you don't exist anymore, is really difficult to reconcile. And like, you know, as I'm getting older, I'm thinking more about not being around anymore. And this had such a relentless, the fact that they were going to disappear had such a relentless pursuit of them. It was almost like Mr. Death in One for the Angels, but like not charming at all. It was just this horrifying.
Well, and abstract, and they have to figure out.
Yeah.
Like when Mr. Death comes in, like, all right, you're scheduled to go at midnight. That
Right.
in some ways is more palatable than there's this force that you can't see or reason with or talk to coming to take you. 100%. And I got to say, you talked about the nothingness and that idea of, you know, what if, you know, when you're gone, that's kind of all there is. This is worse than that. This is worse than you being nothingness. This is you're erased from existence.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers you did exist or were there or has any knowledge of you. Which is a whole nother, you know, we could argue what the value is of, you know, legacy or things like that. But that's a whole nother level when it's not just your time is up and you're gone, but like you were never there and there's no record or effect you had of your existence doing anything.
That's a great call, because like that really kind of the afterlife or your beyond the death thing is the memories that you've left people and the things that you've done and the good, hopefully more good than evil that you've done on the planet. And none of that existed. It was like it just didn't matter. And there was no way for these guys to stop it. This was I love this episode, not to jump ahead, but like this episode was so horror. I watched this a bunch of times in the past week because this was such a horrifying episode for me.
I love that you like, this is horrifying. I can't take it. I better go watch it again.
I know. And like, I'm not that guy. Like I'm
You clearly
such a
are
wuss
that
about
guy.
scary. Well, like scary
did
movies,
it.
I'm such a wuss about it. But like this eerie feeling that this episode gave me, oh, I loved this episode.
No, there's something about wallowing in that sort of
Yeah.
feeling and tone. Yeah, I mean, can you imagine what if you were gone and there was no Deja Reviewed left after you for people to remember you by?
It's just you talking to yourself and there's no responses. And then
gaps.
they would lock you up and throw away the key because you would sound like
it was Mike Broad. He was on there with me. They're like, we have
Oh,
no
Mike
record
Broad,
of
I've
a
known him
Mike
for
Broad.
years.
You've met him. We went to double dates together. That's what Forbes is saying to his. I was unclear. The woman he calls Amy, if it was his wife or girlfriend or what. They clearly had some sort of relationship. I wanted to say wife, but I wasn't sure.
That would be one of my critiques that we've seen in Mr. Denton on Doomsday. That's another just kind of woman used as a prop in Twilight Zone, which they're not great at not doing that. So I agree. It was at one point and this is a good way to piggyback on a comment I want to make. This was the most realistic reactions of characters I thought we've seen in the Twilight Zone. Like, so because Clegg initially is like, hey, what the hell? Like, no, he tells the bartender, he's like, no, my buddy was right here. Like, no, this was and he's trying to prove, he's freaking out and trying to prove to everyone that these three guys actually all existed. And then when he has that conversation with Amy, he's like, oh, I get it. You're all pulling a prank on me. It was the first time where I'm like, this is how I'd be reacting. At first, I'd be like, no, I've got proof. Look, here's the newspaper. Look, here's this note that I wrote you or this telegram that I sent you that mentioned these other guys. And the wool keeps getting pulled, or the rug keeps getting pulled out from under him every time he tries to do that. So he's like, oh, I get it. You guys are all pranking me, because he can't. It's not just like I'm just accepting that this is some supernatural thing that's happening.
Well, and he has
there
to figure,
has to be
figure
an
out
explanation.
some rational explanation.
Yeah.
And I think you're right.
I loved it.
I think you're right about the reactions, and it goes from at first, when we mentioned the bartender is a good example, like trying to convince other people, like, no, he was here, he was right here, you served him a drink, I came in with him, to almost trying to convince himself, like he doesn't want to believe he's crazy.
Yes.
And that's when he's trying to make these rationalizations. And to me, there's this great scene when he goes back to the bar. So as Mike said, he's talking with Amy, who I want to get back to Amy in a second, but
Sure.
talking with her and says, you're all pranking me. Everyone's in it. It's this very elaborate, and you can tell the performance is great. Even he doesn't really believe that, but kind of wants to believe. He's like, he's still at the bar where I last saw him. He's still there, and goes back to the bar, and it's empty, and he breaks in, and it's this wonderful scene, in the dark, lots of, shadowy, contrasty lighting, and he's kind of walking through, and he has this moment of sort of realizing, like, no, he really did disappear. And I think that's when he sort of accepts that he's gone and that he's not crazy, like that he really did vanish. And that's when he's trying to, then he comes to this idea that he had heard Harrington say that something is they weren't supposed to survive and something is kind of cleaning up the mess. But it was a great little performance scene with just him in this empty bar, and then ends up in the phone booth kind of crying in the corner.
And I want to hear more about Amy, but when you say that he broke into that bar, he literally like Frankenstein walks through a glass door. It was like the Kool-Aid man. We didn't get to see anyone run into a mirror in this episode of Twilight Zone, but he just busted through this glass door.
Although that was
funny.
We've praised the production on several of the most recent episodes, including this one. I had to mention, this was a really poor edit. They have a close-up of him literally leaning up against the glass, like sort of just sad, and then cut to him like bursting through the glass like he took a full running start after he was literally leaning on it in like a frame ago.
I'm sorry. I had to get that in there, but tell me what you think about Amy.
Okay, well, so let's go back to Amy. I was going to say, I agree with you. This is another one of these sort of token women in the Twilight Zone who are there for exposition. And something I am wondering about and hoping for is that we actually get an episode with a female protagonist. These are basically every episode is sort of a middle-aged male white guy.
We will.
And so
I'm thinking of one specifically. We will. And
there
a strong
is
female
one
protagonist.
out of 180 episodes or whatever. No, it's more than that. It's like 500 episodes or something. Anyway, how many episodes is it? You had the
500 something.
Lord.
It's over 500.
We are never going to make it through these. We
I
will fade out of existence.
I will force us to watch that episode because it's one of the better episodes, and we've actually mentioned it in this podcast before, but I won't spoil it. But
is it the crashing into the sun one?
It is, yes. So she's a female protagonist, and she's a very strong, very good female.
Okay, so there's one strong female protagonist. Anyway, what I was going to say is Amy, to me, at least was a little better than some of the other ones we've seen. We've talked in previous episodes about the basically terrible marital relationships we see, either where in Escape Clause we have this seemingly very nice, kind woman married to the world's biggest jerk who watches her die and doesn't even care. And then I think it was right after that at Time Enough at Last when we had the guy who's obsessed with reading and this, super mean wife who goes out of her way to make his life more miserable.
Yeah.
And I thought that this actually felt, even though she was sort of a token character just there for him to have somebody to talk to, there's this moment where she first comes in and really is sort of telling him off. They've thrown in these hints earlier in his conversation with Gart and then in some of his actions that he's a bit of an alcoholic. And she comes in and she's like, you sent me this telegram. You said, meet me at this time. You stood me up. Do you have any idea how many bars I went to looking for you? Like, really, like, here he is off on another bender again. Like, really, genuinely what you would expect of her there. And then when she has the realization that something really is wrong this time, it's not him off on a bender, she immediately, like, softens. And I bought that as this sort of long-standing relationship where he's probably gone off on benders and abandoned her multiple times before, but she really did care about him. And I thought that was a level of nuance even to this token character that we haven't seen in some of the prior relationships. I appreciated that.
Yeah, and acting, I know you've kind of alluded to it too. I thought the acting across the board was great for this. I loved the camaraderie and kind of the the like ribbing that the three pilots were giving each other when they were all in the room together, like they were there when they were showing them in the flashback. Like I totally agree. I felt like everything felt like it was actually earned either by their writing or by their performances. I thought I love this episode.
I think you've mentioned that. And, but to that point, the ribbing between the three of them is great, and they use it to sprinkle in a little bit, so Gart mentioned something to Harrington about, don't let him drink too much, and foreshadows that part of the conversation with Amy a little bit. And there was some nice details like that were not crucial to the plot, but where they fleshed things out a bit. And that was something I appreciated here too, even though there's a lot of plot, which I want to talk a little bit more about that, because it's something we have discussed being good or bad in prior episodes. Even though there was a lot, they fit in some of these details and these little personal moments that had nothing to do with the plot, but just added to the reality of these as fleshed out characters, including Amy coming in and yelling at him because she thinks he just went off to a bar and got drunk and forgot to meet her. And those, to me, that was kind of a level up on the writing than most of the ones we've seen, where look, they're 25-minute episodes. Some of them have a lot of plot, and they're just kind of like trying to get through all the plot and don't have time to have these little flourishes and stuff. But I really enjoyed that in this case.
You're right. This had as much or more plot as any of the ones we've seen before packed in, and it didn't feel rushed. I feel like I think not Time Enough at Last, the one with the jerk guy, the escape clause. I think that we felt like there was a lot going on, which was great, but it felt a little bit rushed, whereas this one didn't feel rushed. Like it felt, and frankly, it almost felt like you were, not that you were, but you were almost going along with Clegg in real time, because it's like, oh man, he definitely earned breaking down at the end of it in just the 5 minutes of episode that we saw.
I think that I totally agree with you that even though it wasn't real time, it had a little bit of that feel. And at parts where things felt rushed and fast, like a lot was happening, it felt like that was because how Forbes was feeling. Like stuff's happening fast and you can't slow it down.
Or is his
Clegg
name
Forbes?
Clegg. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Clegg was his last name. Anyhow.
Don't you know a lot of people with the first name of Clegg?
Clegg
Clegg. Which I actually will say for my notes, some of these names were so weird. Gart and Clegg Forbes. I actually stopped when there's the close up of the newspaper photo, which keeps changing through the episode, whether there's 3 people or 2 people. It was very Back to the Future in that sense, or I guess Back to the Future was very this, because that's, another 25 years later.
Right.
But I stopped it on one of those because it had their names below it, and I'm like, I need to type these out right so I actually know what these names are. So it is Clegg Forbes and Major William Gart, who of course goes by Bill, because we need one more bit of confusion in here that his name's William, but they call him Bill. And then Harrington, and I forget what Harrington's first name is. Ed,
yeah. Because I kept thinking Ed Harris.
Maybe it was Ed Harris.
I have kind of a little
Wait,
bit of
who's Ed Harris? I've never even heard of that person.
No, he was in The Rock. It's like, no, that was the guy from Saving Private, or not Saving Private, whatever. Anyhow, let's take a break now, because I do have a couple more thoughts on this episode that I kind of want, that are a little bit deep, that I want to get your opinion on them. So you want to take a break now and we'll come back to that?
Well, it'd be really weird now if I said, no, I don't. So yes, let's do it.
People know that we don't get along.
Fair enough. All right.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back from our break. And one of the things, Mark, not one of the things, I think the deeper thing here that I was thinking about when I was watching this episode was, what does this mean? Like, what? So we kind of alluded to it, or right at the beginning of this episode. It wasn't that these guys disappeared. It's that these guys never existed, because not Harrington, not Clegg. Who's the other guy?
Gart,
he's the one who calls his mother, I think, right? And she says, and the dad gets on the phone. He's like,
no, that's Harrington when they're at the bar.
Oh, that is. You're right. Okay.
The payphone, and yeah.
So that is Harrington.
Which I love. This was like our younger listeners now, if there are any, will have no idea what was happening here. But he just like picks up the phone. He's like, connect me to so and so in this city, like how great. I was like, man, that's so awesome. You pick up the phone, there's a live person, you just tell them who you want to talk to, and they know how to connect it. That's amazing.
Yeah, they're the operator. So that the thing that happened here, so I could see it would have had sort of a Final Destination feel to it if they had been, if they had been erased from existence after they got back because they missed their chance at death, kind of thing.
Like they were fated to die and somehow escaped it, but like, no, your time is up. It's going to come back and get you. Yeah, I actually wrote Final Destination down. When Harrington first mentions his theory, he says something made a mistake and let us get through and we shouldn't have. That felt very Final Destination. But you're right. That's not, I mean,
it's not exactly
in terms
what
of the
happened.
plot, that is kind of what happened. Like they were supposed to die and they do. But yeah, you're right. It's a different sort of metaphysics here.
And Clegg later on says, and I wrote those down those lines from Harrington too. Clegg later on says, and I thought this was such a good turn of phrase. He says they've been yanked out of here, which was such like a violent, great. It was a perfect way of saying it, I thought. But like we said at the very beginning, Mark, this is worse than just dying and being forgotten. This is no one ever knew you were here, and it was so unsettling. And I think we kind of alluded to this too. I don't think we needed the explanation of what exactly happened. Just the idea is so horrifying that it was okay that that's just, okay, well, and we never got an answer. We never got the quote unquote satisfactory answer of what the physics was here, what was actually making them happen. And to that point, as I was watching the episode, I watched it a couple times, and when I was watching, I kind of both do and don't want to know what they were seeing in the mirror, because Harrington at the bar, his first indication that something wrong is happening is he looks at the back bar mirror and he just gets this look and he drops his beer and just looks terrified. And then Clegg at the end looks in the mirror in Gart's room and sees something. And that one of the later times I watched it, I was like, is it just that he doesn't have a reflection or something like that? But you can see when Clegg's looking in the mirror that you can see his body. So you can sort of see his arm, not really his whole body, but you can see his arm still reflecting in the mirror.
Right. It's not that he doesn't have a reflection. And that actually was a follow-up to, we see earlier in the episode, that same angle with the reflection, and the way they have it blocked, you see Clegg entirely in the mirror and can see his face and stuff. And then the second time, they've intentionally changed the angle. So again, they don't put him entirely off screen so that we're supposed to think, oh, I don't see a reflection. Like you see his shoulder and part of his arm, so he's clearly there, but you can't see his face, so you don't get what he's reacting to.
And that, they always say that your imagination is going to come up with way funnier, with way scarier. And I thought the idea that they were seeing something in the mirror that was more terrifying than just not even seeing a reflection of themselves was crazy unsettling and so well done and so eerie and so creepy.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I hadn't made the connection of, I only had a chance to watch through this once, that Harrington looking in the mirror at the bar was what set him off. I definitely noticed when Clegg's back in the hospital room. But yeah, it is a really interesting question, and reminded me a lot of, again, I agree with you. The sort of first thought was Final Destination. Then you sort of realize it's not, because it's not just that they're getting killed, it's that they're being erased or yanked out. It reminded me of a lot of time travel things where, what would happen if we went back and changed something, all these other events never happened, and it's not like somebody got killed or whatever. It's these things literally were wiped from existence and a completely different series of events had happened instead.
Yes.
There's one we usually don't like to give spoilers for more recent movies, but I'm going to go ahead and spoil this because the movie's not that great, so you probably shouldn't see it. But I thought had a really
The Matrix?
Interesting take on time travel was there's no time travel in The Matrix. Or is there? We'll see what happens in Matrix 4. Maybe there will be. Is the Ashton Kutcher movie, The Butterfly Effect.
Yeah.
And there's the basic plot of that is something bad happens to
Amy Smart.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think what her character name is. I don't even remember. To Amy Smart's character. And he has this ability to not really travel in time, but he's sort of like his consciousness goes back to himself when he was younger, and he can act with sort of his adult knowledge and change things. Then he sort of consciousness comes back to the present, but things are different. And he keeps trying to go back and change things to like save her, and he can't. And like I said, the movie's not great. But it does have some interesting ideas in it. And the part that I really thought was smart is ultimately he realizes like the only way he can save her is he can sort of never have been close to her in the first place. And so he goes back to like when they're very little kids, and basically as a little kid is like a complete jerk to her and teases her, and she runs away, and they never have a connection. And that's what it takes to save her, was to erase their whole friendship from existence, even though that was sort of the central thing in his life. And I liked that aspect of this, the question of just people being erased, and the parents, when Harrington calls them like, we never had kids. This is something I would have liked to see this episode. We've talked about some that feel, stretched sometimes in their 20 minutes, and 15 minutes of it is them just rehashing the same thing. This is one I would love to see what they would have done with this as a feature, because I think people have explored these ideas and features in interesting ways, and I think this was as clever a way to do it as any others. And I think with more time and to explore more of that, what would it really mean to be erased, you could really do some creative and disturbing things.
Well, if you want a good version of that same idea from Butterfly Effect, the Stephen King novel, and then they made a Hulu short series out of it, 11/22/63, had a very similar. I mean, there was a lot more going on in 11/22/63 than
That's
just that love story. Yeah, it's a very, frankly, I thought it was a very quick read for a 600-page book, but it's great, and it definitely does, go along with that sort of.
Yeah, I read that on your recommendation, actually, when we were working on a time travel project. That for listeners, we were working on a story about time travel. We were not actually working on a project to build time travel.
It was
maybe
just
we should have done
story.
That
it was a story. No.
Actually, for as much progress as we made on the story, maybe our time would have been better spent working on actual time travel. Anyway, you're right that it's a fast read for 600 pages. It's a page turner, as most Stephen King's are, but there's a lot of material. I will say my beef with that one, and I can't remember the specifics of it now because it's been a long time since I read it, was I was very invested in it, and then I thought at the end it really just kind of like cheaped out on the ending and kind of tied some things up and resolved things very quickly in a way that didn't kind of feel earned with the depth of the rest of the story. But I can't be more specific than that because I don't remember it.
That's a very King thing. I'm a King junkie, and I'm going back. I just finished his most recent, The Institute, which was very good, and actually had a pretty good ending. But King, The Stand is probably one of my favorite books of all time, and it's one of the most ridiculous endings of anything I've ever read. I thought The Dark Tower ended well, but I'm realizing for the King junkie that I am, I haven't read a lot of King. So after I finished The Institute, I'm like, I'm going to go through his bibliography and read the books that I haven't read. So I started with Carrie, which actually I thought had a great ending. And I'm just going to read through King. But 11/22/63, yes, King has a hard time ending a lot of stuff. I feel like if there's one big critique that, other than him maybe needing an editor that's a little more aggressive, that he does have a hard time ending. I love Stephen King, but he does have a hard time ending stuff.
And that might be part of an artifact of he tends to be very creative with his ideas and come up with these elaborate premises and stories that are really engaging and have a lot of meat and stuff to them, but it's one of those where it's going to be very hard to pay off to that level.
Yeah.
And
that's the problem with The Stand. It was an epic, and it's like, how do you end this?
Yeah, well, and look, endings are tough, and when you have like the rare epic or even long involved thing, think of like a TV series that ran a whole bunch of seasons, and people are always dissatisfied with the ending, and there's some degree to which no ending is going to be satisfying to that. And so, so partly defending King, partly also, I do think even within that context, the endings feel like a cop out.
Yeah.
So somewhere in between. But I think of like Lost, I know had a very divisive ending, and I do have the question of like whether or not you liked it. I'm not sure what an ending would have been that satisfied everyone
agreed.
and would have lived up to that. On the flip side, I will say, I guess this isn't the flip, but this would be an example maybe more like King. The X-Files, which I was hugely into, I think was a fantastic series. The end of that series, yes, they had set up all this mythology and there's no way one episode was going to wrap it all up, but they didn't even try. That ending was like, wait, that's how you're ending the episode or ending the series. So I think there's room to try to succeed, even if you're not going to be able to do it. We got way off track, as we often do.
No, I was going to say, King probably has enough novels that do you want to do a Stephen King podcast after this?
After we get through all 500 of this?
40-year-old Stephen King novels and just read through those one at a time. We probably
well,
won't
and
be
also
able to
some
do
of
it
the I was going to say some of those novels are going to take me 2 months to read. So this will be like, all right, here's episode 2, 6 months later.
Well, we'll get 5 years of recordings in the can, and then we'll start releasing them.
Fair.
So one other thought that I had about, and I don't want to get too plot heavy in this because I don't think it mattered that much. I think the idea was so cool and so horrific that that how they got there or how they conveyed it wasn't that important. But at the end, one of the things they mention when they get the open room, one of the things the doctors mentioned is he's like, oh, this is perfect for the malaria patients that we have. And so I looked up, so malaria itself doesn't necessarily cause hallucinations, but the treatment and prevention drugs for malaria cause hallucinations. So I was wondering if we were supposed to think more about if that was a hint. But then at the very end, I think it may even be the very last shot, the ship is also gone. Like everything is gone about these guys. So I was
although it was funny because the ship is gone, but the tarp that was over it is still there, and the area around it is still coned off.
Yes,
it's like somebody's like, we should just cone off this tarp lying in the middle of the floor.
If Rod Serling had loved callbacks as much as improvisers love callbacks, they should have had a bunch of reporters standing around the room that guy in I'm All Alone, whatever that episode.
Where is everybody?
Where is everybody? The very first episode.
I made a note. I think that's the same set.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, the big empty warehouse. My first thought is like, this is the warehouse where the first guy was from our first episode. With all the reporters hanging around outside for apparently weeks.
Right. But I didn't know exactly what to think of that. And I didn't want to ruin the episode by putting more thought into it than it needed. Mm-hmm. But I thought that I was wondering if that was like a subtle little, was this all in there? If that was intentional that they picked malaria malaria patients to mention in the scene when the room is empty. Because Mark, you kind of alluded to it, but as the guys were disappearing, also their beds were disappearing because there were 3 beds in the room, and then it got down to 0 obviously when the last guy disappeared. So I thought that if that was supposed to be a little nod at like, is this all in their heads? I thought that was a neat little nod to it.
I was amused by the idea that in this military hospital, they had a room that was sitting there that could accommodate 3 patients that they literally hadn't even put beds in because the doctor's like, well, we should requisition some beds for this. Like,
and I love that
why were there not beds in there?
I love how he had to go see the room. The nurse was like, well, I'll show you the room. He's like, yep, this is a room, all right, with nothing in it. Let's put some beds.
Yeah, I have to say, my least favorite part of this entire episode was that end coda scene where the answer was right there in front of them. Like Gart goes back into his room, and then the nurse walks in from our perspective, and we think she's coming back to check on him or see, because he was a little worked up, what was going on with him, and instead just like comes in and like, makes up the empty bed, and then yells out the hall to the doctor, like, we can take 3 patients in here or something like that. And instead they build this whole scene with the nurse and the doctor out in the hallway, brutally over establishing that that room is empty and they are all gone, when we all knew that's where it was happening. And literally has to say, like, the room's empty. It could take 3 patients, but there's no one in there. And then as you said, like, well, let me see. Yes, it's a room. It's empty. Okay. And I was like, oh man, you did this episode so well, and the answer was staring you right in the face. And this was another one which we've seen not frequently in the Twilight Zone. I've actually been a fan of generally that they let the audience think about some things themselves and kind of trust you. But the last few episodes, if I had a critique of them, even as the production value has been going up and most of the stories have been getting more interesting, is they've had, each of them has had kind of this one moment where they just really over-explain something that we all got.
Yeah.
And your usual comment on this is something about, that we were, which I think there's some truth to, that we've been exposed to more sci-fi at this point and are used to these sort of twist things and can maybe get a little ahead. This was one where I thought the episode was done so well. Like, we knew where it was, and you could have established it with the nurse coming back in and just saying something about the room's empty. You didn't need to build a whole scene about it.
Mm-hmm.
As usual, I've gone off on a long critique of something
No.
minor in the episode.
I think that's okay.
Overall, like the episode. Can I?
Because I really only have one. Ooh, I'll totally let you get to that because I only really have one last comment on the actual episode itself. That bartender cannot pour a beer.
I wrote the same thing. This bartender is terrible.
But by the time, so he would pour the beer where it was like a quarter actual beer and then just head in like these like almost champagne looking flutes. But by the time they got to drink them, it had filled with beer to where it was like a normal size head. But that bothered me every time I
want
watch
to say
it. I'm sorry.
we are both estimating about the same, because where I noted their bartender is terrible, their drinks are like 80% foam, which would be about a quarter actual
25%.
beer. Like, we were both estimating that right on the same page.
Yeah.
And it is funny because it wasn't like, so as we know, like, it's not like a full glass of foam is going to condense into a full glass of beer.
A full
It'll
beer,
condense
yeah.
into much less. But it was like funny because you would see this glass that's almost all foam, and then they just cut to the next shot and it's completely filled with beer.
Yeah. I did like the actor that played that bartender, though. He's like, all right, it's okay, you guys. He was a very likable bartender. Maybe that's why they didn't care that he was terrible at pouring beers.
I liked his line too about when he's like, your money's no good here. I don't usually get a chance to serve celebrities. And to me, it was sort of this callback to I don't know if I want to say a more innocent time, but like a time when like space travel was new and exciting and would have been interesting, and like their celebrities.
You knew the names of every astronaut.
Yeah, because they got to go up into space. And now I don't want to say it's routine, but I mean, how many astronauts could you name? I can't name any.
Nope. Not ones that are current astronauts.
I can name the guys from this episode who were astronauts in this show.
Gart Clegg. Maybe it's because
Colonel
astronauts have weird names.
So I want to mention one other thing as I talked about the ending, and it's I guess critique of part of the beginning. And what I would say is I was interested in this episode kind of from the get-go. It raises some questions. There's always sort of something you feel like is at stake, or you're getting more knowledge as it goes and finding out where things are happening. So I don't want to say that I was not interested in the beginning, because it grabbed my attention and kind of held it. I will say there's a sort of lack of knowledge or confusion you can have where the episode's kind of hiding something and it hasn't been revealed yet, and they're like gradually building things up that can be very effective. This one, I felt the first couple minutes, and I really mean till about like maybe 5 minutes in, when this was sort of explained between Gart and Forbes, I was legitimately confused about who Gart was, because I'm like, wait, I thought he was one of the spacemen, but then from the early conversation, it doesn't even sound like he went into space with Forbes. So is he somebody else who Forbes has come back from space, and this was his friend who's in the and it was kind of distracting me from the episode, just trying to get a handle on what Gart's role was, particularly as they're playing with time. And I'm like, well, maybe he's in the hospital because he was on the plane, but I'm like, but then this is supposed to be like the next day, wouldn't all of them have still been in the hospital, whoever was and they end up explaining all these things. So I'm not saying there's like disconnects in the plot or things where they say one thing and change it to something else, but I felt like they just withheld for no good reason, and actually to their detriment. Somebody just explicitly saying, like, when he first walks in, like, Gart, I know I got released yesterday. How are you laid up? Obviously, write it better. But, like, give us that information because I was really confused about their relationship.
Now, I don't think that this is intentional, but there is a possibility that they did that intentionally to intentionally get you in the emotional state or emotional feeling that Clegg was in the entire episode, that state of confusion. I don't necessarily think that was intentional. It was probably more of an issue of writing.
Yeah, I would say if it was intentional, it was a poor choice because I actually did go, I stopped the episode. I know you wouldn't have been able to do this when it first aired, but I stopped and went back and watched from the beginning because I'm like, maybe I missed a point where somebody said something and I didn't. And even when in that opening scene before it's kind of cut into the middle of the Rod Serling voiceover where Forbes runs into the nurses and he says, like, is, Major Gart still in there? They're like, yes. And then the camera stays with the nurses for a second. They're like, wait, isn't he one of the spacemen? Like, yes. And it would have been a perfect opportunity to say, like, wait, isn't he the other spaceman who was with Gart? Like, explain it. But they really made it sound like Gart was not one of the spacemen and Forbes was. And I thought it took me a while to get into the emotional state and emotionally connect with the characters because I was so confused about what the heck was going on and just what these characters' roles were. And that's something where generally the Twilight Zone has been very good at efficiently setting up because usually they have so much plot to get through so quickly.
Fair enough.
Then by the time we're about 5 minutes in, so 20% of the way through the episode, they had established that. We knew that they both went but had some kind of different experience. And I really liked it. About 6 minutes in, the question was established. Like, Forbes thinks there was a third person there, and Gart doesn't. He thinks it was just the two of them, and raised a whole bunch of ways this could go. But that was you had me at that moment. I'm like gripped, like, okay, one of them is right and one is wrong. They can't both be right. Either there were three or two. And which of them is it, and why is the other one confused? And that's an interesting enough question to keep me going.
Yeah. I don't mean to push you along, Mark, but I think we got to get to some other stuff. Do you have any other thoughts on the episode itself before we get to our sweat level and our closing narration, then sweat level?
Could I do, usually in this section, we do some quick references to other things that you may want to watch.
Let's leave that for modern applicability because I think that...
I thought that's where we were in.
Oh, no. I haven't done the closing narration yet, and then we've got our sweat level.
Okay.
All right,
then we can move on, I guess.
Our closing narration. Once upon a time, there was a man named Harrington, a man named Forbes, a man named Gart. They used to exist, but don't any longer. Someone or something took them somewhere. At least they are no longer a part of the memory of man. And as to the X-20 supposed to be housed here in this hangar, this too does not exist. And if any of you have questions concerning an aircraft and 3 men who flew her, speak softly of them, and only in the Twilight Zone. That's another creepy question. Where did they go? But I don't want to get to that.
Well, they're no longer in the Twilight Zone, so they went someplace even weirder.
Yes, super creepy. Okay, so let's do a quick sweat level, and then we can get back to your modern applicability and themes. Sweat level?
I'd say maybe 4.
Okay, I was going to say 3, so I'm fine with a 4.
They were sweaty but nervous, so it made sense.
Yeah, exactly. There's only a little bit where I actually noticed the sweat was a bit much at the end when he was talking to Gart, so I would say 4 is fair.
He was about to disappear, so then maybe that's like vanishing into the ether sweat. I don't know if that's a thing.
Fair enough. Okay, I'm sorry. Back to modern applicability, or for me, to modern applicability.
Okay. Well, now I've lost my... Oh, it was... Yeah, so some references. When Harrington started to feel weird when they're in the bar, so as you mentioned, after he looks at the mirror, I thought maybe at that point the episode was going to be like Forbes is explaining all the stuff he thought that happened to Harrington. Explaining to Gart all the stuff he thought had happened with Harrington, and then we were going to realize that Harrington was literally a figment of Forbes' imagination. Yeah. He's just hallucinating him like A Beautiful Mind or Fight Club.
Yes. Yes, I thought the same thing at one point.
Yeah, and then I was like, or maybe this was all in Forbes' head, but not like that he is an imaginary friend. Literally, he's the one in the hospital just hallucinating, and I think that was maybe sparked by us having just watched Perchance to Dream, where it literally did turn out everything we saw was in the person's head. So that was still fresh in me.
And that would have fit in with the malaria thing at the end that they mentioned, that's malaria patients.
Yeah, why don't we just rewrite this? Come on, man.
I mention that all the time. We could definitely punch up these scripts.
Instead of doing this podcast, we should just take every episode, make like minor changes, and just remake the Twilight Zone. But like not like a reboot, like it's literally all the same episodes in
Just
the same
tweaked.
order with minor script tweaks.
Yeah.
Then the other thing that this reminded me of in terms of previous Twilight Zone episodes, which we've had a lot of connections to this one in various ways, was Walking Distance, where you remember, I can't think of the guy's name, but he goes back and kind of is in his childhood home,
Yes.
at his childhood home, and changes something. He ends up knocking his younger self off this merry-go-round, gets injured, and then he has a limp later on, and kind of comes back. And one of the things we talked about with that episode was it was unclear whether he had memories of how this thing that just happened, or he had just sort of absorbed those all into his life, and all he ever remembered now was being knocked off a merry-go-round when he was a kid, didn't know that he was the one who had done this. I was wondering about this when they started showing the newspaper, and the newspaper changing from like showing 2 spacemen return or 3 spacemen return or whatever, very Back to the Future, as we've mentioned.
I made that same note.
Yeah, and I was thinking maybe their trip, at this point we hadn't got Harrington's theory that something was, something let him through that shouldn't have, as he said it, and that they were all just going to be erased from existence. I really thought maybe their ship somehow, went through a wormhole or something, went back and changed something in time, and Harrington had been sort of erased from existence but via time travel, and somehow Forbes was like outside the bubble or something, was the only one who remembered that he had actually existed. And that reminded me very much of Walking Distance, where everyone else sort of just absorbed these changes, and what if you were the one who knew how things had been before?
Yeah.
And I just love anything dealing with time travel or time travel possibilities.
Yes, me too. And I made the same note that the newspaper changing reminded me of the picture and the newspapers in Battlestar, Back to the Future as well. So I wrote that down.
Well, speaking of Battlestar, right from the very beginning, the part, and this is even in Rod Serling's opening voiceover, that they went off radar for 24 hours. And I don't want to do spoilers for Battlestar because people should watch that and experience it on their own. But there's definitely a part of this where I was thinking of where something went off the radar they thought was gone and like comes back later.
True. And then also just the erasing from existence, for the most modern thing I think I've thought of any of this. And I am not a big follower of this entire universe, but this very much reminded me of the snap in Infinity War, and the Avengers Infinity War or whatever it is, because it was just this unstoppable thing. But I think something you mentioned right at the beginning of this episode, it's even worse than that, because the snap didn't erase you from ever existing. It just essentially killed you, I guess, whatever
so
it actually
it killed
did.
a huge number of people, and you couldn't stop it, but everyone remembered they existed, and in fact that was sort of motivation for a lot of the characters afterwards, was trying to avenge all the people who had been snapped out of existence. Not like, hey, didn't there used to be a Spider-Man? Well, I don't remember that.
Exactly.
There's a great line, I forget if it's in Infinity War or Endgame, but where Bruce Banner comes back after having been kind of out of the loop for a while and is like, wait, there's a Spider-Man and an Ant-Man now? Like, what the hell's going on here?
I just want to get this joke in, and I didn't have a place to put this, but I do think this is modern applicability because of this word being used so much. They could have definitely called this episode The Gaslight Zone.
Oh.
Because
he thought he was being gaslit.
Exactly. Yeah, there's definitely, I assumed that's how it would feel like to be being gaslit by everyone. Because and again, I just want to shout out the acting in this one, because I thought they all, and the writing as well, but I thought they all did just a great job. But the feeling of just feeling crazy, I thought was super well captured.
Yeah.
In Clegg.
Well, and it had a little bit of the Fincher, Sean Penn, Michael Douglas movie, The Game, where it does turn out that everyone really is in on this giant scheme to make him think something.
I haven't thought of that one in a while.
I watched that not like super recently, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, and a lot of it is held up pretty well. it's one where I think once you kind of know what the outcome is going to be, it's
Sure.
less interesting.
Sure, like an M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, although some of those definitely, some of the best ones of that, once you kind of know it, you like almost want to go watch it again to see like what you had missed and how it was set up. And the game, once I sort of knew the twist, like, okay, I got it. It was enjoyable, but not necessarily something I needed to see again. When you're talking about the gaslighting, the other, I can do like a modern and a more contemporary to the Twilight Zone, or actually maybe a little earlier than that applicability, would be the sort of Soviet era, eliminating enemies, like Stalin decides
Sure.
they no longer like Trotsky anymore, and suddenly they go back and terribly Photoshop him because they didn't have Photoshop yet, but out of all the old photos, like literally erasing people from their history. And there was a big to-do to follow our usual MO of saying we don't really want to talk politics, but let's talk politics. There was the to-do with the National Archives and the photos of the Women's March where they took some heat for blurring out the anti-Trump signs in the
Yes.
photos in this big, exhibit, which I think they should have taken heat for.
Yeah.
Not because I'm anti-Trump, which I am, but because like
Just to be clear.
you're the
No,
National
that censorship,
Archives, like
yeah.
your job is to kind of present things as they were, and they said,
Right.
well, we didn't want it to be divisive, or like, but that's completely eliminating the context in which this
Yeah.
thing happened.
Don't edit the naked people out of Woodstock. That was what
Right.
Woodstock was.
Yeah, we got these pictures of like war victims, and they all looked really like beat up and injured and stuff from the battle. So we just cleaned all
cleaned
that
them up.
out, and
Yeah.
yeah. I was about to say some much more inappropriate things, so I just sort of censored
other thought
myself
ab-
there.
My other thought about the themes for this is that this was another, I thought, somewhat religious episode, because whatever the divine force was that was kind of intervening in these guys coming back, I thought was had some at least sort of religious allegory. But that was kind of the just the thought that it was something that I feel like we've seen as a theme from Twilight Zone a couple times.
Yeah, and this one is less explicitly quote
Yeah,
unquote
for sure.
religious than some of the others, but the existence of some sort of supernatural force bigger than them who can erase someone from existence from ever having been there is definitely, it's definitely supernatural / religious, however you want to take that. But there definitely is a higher power of some sort in this, meaning more powerful than humans.
Agreed.
Maybe aliens. I don't know. I really thought for a while at the beginning that we were going to somehow get some aliens involved in this. I'm still hoping for more aliens. We haven't seen enough of those yet.
We'll see some aliens.
It's the Twilight Zone. I want aliens.
Well, what do you think, Mark? Do you have other thoughts, or should we rate this bad boy?
I think I'm about done. Just another shout out to another episode with some good camera work that I like quite a bit, and particularly when Forbes is in the empty bar at the end, they had a really great shot there, kind of pulling back with him and then going up and looking down at him in the corner of the phone booth from sort of above the phone booth was great.
Cool.
I'm done.
Cool. So let's rate it. I suspect you can guess what I want to give this one.
I'm guessing a 2.
This for sure was a 5 for me. I thought this one pulled all of the chills up my spine strings that the Twilight Zone is capable of doing.
And I'm gonna go. I'm gonna have to say 4.5 on this one. I like the ideas a lot. I definitely enjoyed the episode. The fact that the beginning was so confusing to me was just something like in the 5-star episodes. Like I thought Judgment Night, which was the last one we'd looked at, so we got 2 really good ones back to back. That one I was like hooked and kind of with it for the ride the whole way through. And this one, it took me a little while to kind of figure out what was going on enough to get hooked.
Sounds good.
So 2 solid episodes, people. You can tune
really good
into
episodes.
The
back to
Twilight
back.
Zone starting at that point.
So do you want to take a guess at what next week's episode is?
Sure. What's the title?
The title
Or do I
is
have to guess that too?
You have to guess. Yeah. The title is What You Need.
Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that like many of these episodes, we see some of the same themes revisited and such. And one of the things that we've seen recurring is this idea of sort of what you think you want isn't what actually is best for you. So I'm going to say this is something about where another one of those ironic sort of episodes where somebody thinks they really need something and gets it and finds out that actually they needed something different, or that when they get what they need, it does not work out for them.
That's very Twilight Zone monkey's paw-ish. I like it.
Well, we keep seeing that, so I figure my odds are at least good that it'll be some version of that based on that we know the Twilight Zone likes that.
And if you guys, thank you guys all, of course, for listening. This was Deja Review. If you guys want to see if Mark was right and watch along with us, next week's episode is episode 12 of season 1 of the Twilight Zone. It's on Netflix. It's titled What You Need. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us, or you can find us at DejaReview.com, and we hope that you tune in next week.
Deja Review.